Hello, this is Miss Homer, and we're doing part 2 of week 2, chapter 2. A lot of 2's in there, of the nature-nurture debate and language theories. Now, I'm just going to give a brief overview because we will have done this in class already, and probably will have done some operant conditioning experiments, and hopefully it went well. Don't really know when I'm doing this video, but so we have been talking about language theory, and this is what we will have talked about in class of behavioral theory. So we will have gone over B.F. Skinner, the well-known behaviorist, how he theorized that parents model language, and that's basically how children learn language in his mind. It was through reward and punishment and this theory of operant conditioning, positive and purely shaped by positive and negative reinforcement. So he was on the nurture side of that pendulum or spectrum. And I think I will have gone over some of this stuff in class, the Skinner box, how he instituted laboratory animal experiments to kind of support his theory of operant conditioning. And basically, we're going to go down. Do remember the verbal episode that we talked about in class, that modality is not the key, that the listener responds to verbal behavior, and that verbal behavior is defined as any movement capable of affecting another organism may be verbal, according to B.F. Skinner. You will also have to know, highlighted in red, ABCs. Your ABCs, antecedent, laying the scene or the groundwork, what happens before the actual behavior that we're measuring, then the behavior itself, and then the consequence. And the consequence can be reinforcing, punishing, or not reinforcing, whether that behavior will reoccur or recur. We talked about operant conditioning, three-term contingency. You will have to know, I think, what a discriminative stimulus, and I usually give an example about crinkling bag of treats for my dog. And basically, as soon as a dog who has been familiarized with getting a treat from a plastic bag that kind of crinkles, treat bags, when we go to get a treat for ourselves out of our pantry, such as maybe some pretzels or chips or whatever it comes in a bag that probably we shouldn't be eating to begin with, anyhow, that is a discriminative stimulus for a dog in that instance because it follows a voluntary response. So they are kind of conditioned to the fact that there may be a treat in it for them. Antecedent conditions, that's the MO, setting the scene. Consequence, that happens after the behavior. It could be direct and tangible, so they could get a reward. It could be social, educational, get the reward that way. And then we talked about reinforcement, so it could be positive or negative. Positive is what we refer to as a reward. It is something that is desirable, that is given to the research subject, so they get something after the behavior. So basically, if we're rewarding someone every time they get a good grade, a good report card, we're giving them money, we're giving them candy, that's reinforcing for them to continue in that behavior. Whereas negative reinforcement is an undesirable thing or action that is taken away or removed after a behavior is performed. And we give some examples here about going to the theater and bringing a sweater because you're cold. Do feel free to click on that link. You'll be able to at least view partially reinforcement versus punishment on study.com, but pretty much we went over this in class. Those are some fun links. I think one involves a Super Bowl kind of scenario with some kittens. I think it was the 2015 Super Bowl. And there's another one from Everybody Loves Raymond, I believe. They're both kind of letting you know about positive and negative reinforcement, and you should be able to identify those. Schedules of reinforcement. So we talked about these briefly in class. They can be continuous, interval, and ratio. And we also talked about how continuous reinforcement is rapid in learning, but it doesn't maintain a behavior, because after you stop continuously reinforcing, the desired behavior is going to stop because the reinforcement isn't there. So, yeah. And you should also note that continuous reinforcement here on the bottom here is actually a specific example of what we call the fixed ratio schedule. And that involves getting rewarded every single time. So it is predictable. A fixed ratio is predictable. So if you're rewarding after every single response, it is kind of a fixed deal. And it's a part of ratio reinforcement. So we have continuous reinforcement schedules, meaning that you're constantly reinforcing after each time it occurs, the behavior. Interval reinforcement schedules are based on either the passage of time in an interval, specific interval, or the number of correct responses emitted. So a ratio of maybe 3 questions or something like that. Ratio reinforcement refers to reinforcement after a certain number of correct responses. So the consequence can be delivered based on the amount of passage of time or the same number of correct responses. That would be fixed. And then, of course, there's variable. You should just kind of be generally familiar with those definitions. Hint, hint. So I give an example here that you may need to know, the variable ratio and interval reinforcement schedules, and how they have proven particularly interesting in explaining addiction or addictive habits. So gambling, for example, provides some evidence that variable ratio reinforcement does continue behavior, because basically when you're playing or gambling, there's always a chance you can win, and you don't want anybody else to win your money that you've gambled. So there's that. I gave you some nice charts to look at. Punishment. So please know the example of this speeding and parking ticket example. Providing a negative response to a behavior that needs to change is punishment by definition. There's an example of negative punishment there. And extinction. Now, extinction is something that we term basically, excuse me, I kind of lead into the mic there. Basically, is the process of losing a conditioned behavior. What we kind of do, especially like in certain situations, is that we do a tactic called planned ignoring. So if children, for example, are throwing a temper tantrum with the motivation being that they're going to seek the attention or they're going to obtain something because of their tantruming, parents often, when they're tired and when they just can't take it anymore, cave. So they reinforce, yes, you're right, reinforce that behavior. Whereas if you take the time to say, you know what, I'm not going to let that behavior continue, so I'm not going to show it any attention. I'm going to just simply help you work out of this behavior. You might actually see an increase in the behavior initially, but then it will kind of calm down. I did give the example of the nanny in class, and I just want to kind of show, I think this might be the one. Hang on a second here.